Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Majlis and Markets. We've made it to episode 74, which is a great milestone. We're very, very close to 75, which will be a great milestone for this podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hassan Jivraj, and welcome back to this podcast. Before we begin this podcast, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and also follow us on all social media channels at Majlis and Markets. But now I'd like to introduce my guest for part two again, Issam Altawari. Issam, welcome back to Majlis and Markets.
Thank you very much for having me again. It's a real pleasure, and I'm really happy to hear that we're reaching episode 74, which is a great milestone, as you said.
Yes, Issam, you were episode number 2, I think, I was just talking to you just now offline, December 2023, when we did episode 2 of Majlis and Markets, and that was really well received by a lot of people who wanted to learn more about Kuwait and what's happening over there. And Issam, obviously a lot's gone on since we last spoke on the podcast. Why don't you give us a little icebreaker and tell us what have you been up to since the last podcast?
Well, since the last podcast, a lot has changed in the region as a whole, and in Kuwait in particular. In the geopolitics, we all know what's happening, with the war between Ukraine and Russia, and then the war in Gaza, its impact on the region, stability of the region, growth of the region. Kuwait has basically stood very firmly with the Palestinian rights for existence and for Palestinian people to have their say in the Palestinian state. Kuwait has always advocated a two-state solution. It refused to follow suit with the sort of other countries that have normalized their relationship with Israel. So that's and with the new Trump administration, I don't think they're swallowing that. But however, Kuwait being sort of in the shadows outside of the sort of main news in the media, so that's why it's being sort of kept aside. However, I think when things settle down, the U.S. will start putting pressure on Kuwait to normalize with Israel. And I think the official position of Kuwait is that they will be the last GCC state to normalize after the Palestinian people sort of get their rights and a peaceful solution is reached in the region. So that's on the political side, regional on the region itself. If we focus more locally, well, yes, a lot has happened in Kuwait. It basically became a kind of an obstacle for the development of Kuwait. They have been basically the democratic experiment, and I like to use the word experiment in Kuwait because we're still experimenting with democracy, although we had our democracy since 1961. Of course, Kuwait and Kuwaitis enjoy a large sort of spectrum space for expression of freedom of speech and expression. That had basically its positive impact, sort of whether in the business side or the art side, and that's common. However, Parliament, in my personal view, has steered away from its original sort of objective and direction. So it became an obstacle, and so the Emir has made, after basically giving a number of speeches, warnings to the parliament that they need to basically collaborate, cooperate with the government, and it's the kind of confrontational sort of stance with the government, so that they can focus on implementing the government plan. That did not go well with the parliament. So eventually the Emir has decided to dissolve the parliament and uphold certain clauses of the constitution for a period up to 4 years. So what happened next? People received that news with comfort. Many people, okay? Because they were agitated by the continuous confrontation between parliament and government, and the instability in the political scene, the continuous changes in the government, action after another. The average government lifespan was probably less than a year in the past 7 or 8 years. We had 3, 4 prime ministers in the last 10 years or something. So now has been directed by the Emir to start reforms. Reforms on the judicial side, reforms on the legal side, reforms on the economic side. And he's watching everybody. People are much more at ease today than they were about a year ago. The pace of reforms is not as fast as people have expected, but they are seeing things are changing, not as fast as they expected. However, they think that things are changing. For example, now they have promised mega projects will start basically coming on stream. 3 projects. One is Bobian, or basically Mubarak al-Kabir port has been assigned to a Chinese company as wastewater project, which is about $3 billion, has been awarded recently. And there is another smaller project. So we're seeing sort of major infrastructure projects being implemented. The quality of the roads in Kuwait, which has always been an agony and a source of complaint for many Kuwaitis, because of corruption so whenever the train, stones come out of the streets and causes damage to many cars' windscreens, and so it was a terrible, terrible thing. And again, so they're now working on basically laying down new roads, and people are seeing that taking place. There has been now they're restructuring the government sort of structures. In the past, the ministries used to have like a minister, an undersecretary, and probably a large team of undersecretaries, probably sometimes 12 or 13. Now the new directives is each ministry will have a minister, of course, and an undersecretary, and only 2 undersecretaries. And those who used to basically function as undersecretaries will become general managers of their own sectors. Many people did not like that structure, so they resigned, which is basically part of restructuring. So you need to have a much more lean government structure in place. So that's taking place. One of the tricky sort of issues that has sort of evolved as a result of is what's called the national identity. What's national identity? During the Parliament time, there has always been calls to scrutinize the number of Kuwaitis who've been nationalized unlawfully. And when I say unlawfully, either not following the strict letter of the law or by cheating. And since last year, there were around maybe more than 50,000 people who basically become non-citizens of Kuwait. Many of them are wives of Kuwaitis. However, what Kuwait has promised is that those who've cheated, it's a crime, so they'll go after them. Those who've lost their citizenship because of the changes in the law, and people can debate whether this is justifiable or not, but I'm just talking about stating the fact that they will continue to enjoy their benefits as Kuwaitis without carrying the Kuwaiti passport. So they will continue to be on their jobs, they'll continue to have their pension, they'll continue to have all privileges that Kuwaitis enjoy, and their national ID it will mention have their original citizenship. Another column saying enjoying Kuwaiti treatment. Okay, so he will have the same rights and privileges without the right to. And this is an ongoing thing. It created some tension, especially within families. Kuwaitis have married. They have a lot of foreign intermarriages. Okay, whether from GCC, Arab, or foreign. And these, you can imagine the frustration that families would go through and basically trying to collect their paperwork and try to get their original citizenship back. And so that this is leaving a little bit of a bitter taste with many families here in Kuwait. It is what it is. On the positive side, the government has managed to find a lot of people who have citizenship in an unlawful way. One, it's either through nepotism with the previous from within, trying to buy their loyalty with certain sort of for certain situations. So they would basically bring a list and they will nationalize them just to keep them quiet. Again, these are bad practices that has taken place in the past. This has changed a lot of the demographics of the Kuwaiti society in a negative way. And those who have basically were selling citizenship and making false claims that certain people basically as their children, and they were not. And in the past, there were no DNA tests and what have you. And the rest is history. But there are many of those cases that has surfaced. Of course, those whose their citizenship been revoked can appeal that decision, and they've already opened the door for such appeals to substantiate why they should not be their citizenship should not be revoked. So today, as we speak, the government need to now they don't have an excuse for not operating, for not delivering their promises, because in the past we could not work because the parliament's been basically pushing us around. And so people, their level of patience is basically can have certain limit, and they want to see things change. So and the Emir himself, they want to see things change in the country. I may have just mentioned to you a little earlier that one of the things that are changing Kuwait is the opening up of the country for tourism. So they've just launched Visit Kuwait sort of platform, and they're hoping to see more people coming visiting Kuwait. Some certain things that we can offer our neighbors and our guests from the rest of the world. We got some nice restaurant joints locally, nice shopping sort of experience. We still don't have VAT in Kuwait, so we're 15% cheaper than our neighboring countries when it comes to shopping. People and Kuwaitis in general are people, so they're very open society and some visitors. So we're hoping, to see sort of a new revenue driver coming to Kuwait other than oil, by encouraging sort of I would say family tourism into Kuwait. So we'll have to do some kind of assessment after 6 months, see how well this has gone.
Mashallah, that sounds really great. That's a really nice overview you gave of the socioeconomics and the societal changes that have taken place in Kuwait. But Issam, one thing I wanted to ask you is that, Kuwait is a very anomaly in the Gulf, in the sense that, like as you've alluded to, that it has this parliament, and it has some kind of representation of the people vote for their lawmakers. For outsiders who don't know too much about Kuwait, and we probably talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, and people may have read articles, but how much power or how much authority does this parliament wield in terms of policy making?
Enough to stop the economic development of Kuwait. It had a lot of power. It had a lot of power for two reasons. One, it has an inherent power within the constitution, basically to stop and question. And to stop and question tool was used in a negative way, where basically it curtailed any sort of projects taking place. It was used mainly to protect certain groups' interests from being affected. And this was the negative side of things. The other reason why it was strong, it's because the government was weak. Because the government was weak at that time, basically came to fill in that vacuum of power and authority. It became, instead of legislating new laws, it started to get involved with the implementation and execution, because the government was not strong enough. So that's why. However, this is, when I talk about the parliament, I'm talking about within the last 20 years. The parliament, during its first inception, 1961, up to 1975, 56, It was much more progressive. It helped to basically nationalize our oil, came and brought it to under the ownership of the government. It basically promoted Kuwait as a regional mediator. It basically helped to progress the society, whether on the political, educational, healthcare, housing. It was a positive contributor to Kuwait during that time. However, later on, with the changes in the geopolitical situation, after the Iranian Revolution, Kuwait sort of chose to close on itself afterwards, and look after the security situation within Kuwait. That brought everything more inwards, and we lost a lot of our innovation in the process. And that's when the government stopped focusing on development and focusing on security, and tried to play politics and how to keep this noisy parliament, keep it quiet, and started to please the parliament rather than deal with those situations, with the challenges that it was having.
Yeah, no, it seems like I remember, I don't know if it was you or somebody said to me that after the invasion of, when Iraq invaded Kuwait in the 90s, Kuwait was very inward looking. It didn't, like before that period, as you said, before the 1979 revolution of Iranian Revolution, Kuwait was very far ahead in a lot of fields. And even like from my own experience, people anecdotally have said to me Kuwait was way ahead in a lot of fields: education, research, even financial markets. I think Kuwait was one of the first interconnected in the Gulf in the 80s, back in those days. If we bring it back to today, as you said, even 2 years from when we last spoke, nearly 2 years, a lot's changed in the region. You know, you have a lot more younger leaders, let's say, in countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and a lot of these countries are doing a lot of things in their own, with their own economic diversification and economic visions. But one thing about Kuwait that's really interesting is that it has the oldest sovereign wealth fund, and it has probably the largest among all the Gulf countries. Do you think that the Kuwait sovereign wealth funds, or the entities within Kuwait are competing on the same level as, say, Public Investment Fund or Abu Dhabi or even Qatar?
Well, I think the Kuwait Sovereign Wealth Fund, or that's being sort of managed by KIA, Kuwait Investment Authority, has got a different objective than the other sovereign wealth funds. The other sovereign wealth funds are trying to basically be more of an active investor and use the sovereign wealth fund as a way to increase the profile of their own country. We used to do that back in the 80s, not anymore. Our sovereign wealth fund is more about preserving the wealth of the nation and growing it. We stopped doing direct deals as Kuwait itself, or as Kuwait Inc., if you like, and we basically invest through our investment managers and in different asset classes. I think more recently, Kuwait has even sold its direct stake, or part of its direct stake, in Mercedes-Benz in Germany, which was announced. Again, so that just shows you that we are shifting from direct ownerships to indirect ownerships through fund managers. So that's why I'm saying Kuwait Sovereign Wealth Fund is much more low-key, and it's more about preservation and growth of wealth rather than basically acting more like a high-profile institutional investor.
Yeah, no, it seems like people have always said like Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia is getting more involved in the local economy and local private sector, whereas Kuwait, it seems like it's just taking the windfall from the oil, from the natural resources that the country has, and putting it for the future generations. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Issam, is that you mentioned in the nice summary you gave earlier on about the fiscal reform reality check that Kuwait has. Like, give a little bit more color, since for our listeners and viewers. How would you characterize Kuwait's current fiscal situation?
Okay, first things first. Kuwait has been running deficits for the last 8 or 9 years. We had one year where we had a surplus, which was probably 2023, right after COVID. if I'm not mistaken. So we've been running a deficit. And because of the deficit, the government's trying to cut back on the cost and see where are the areas of waste. And that's part of the reforms that are taking place. Secondly, one of the most sort of talked about topics and subject is the public debt law. Okay, which the mandate has expired in 2017. And just before that, we had our 7 billion bond issue, which will be maturing in 2027. Again,
Bond issuance, right?
because
International bond
sorry?
issuance. The international bond issuance we're talking about.
Yeah,
Right?
international bond issues. Yeah. And since 2017 until early this year, bond issuance taking place until now the new law's just been passed. It's been taken into consideration that it's much more flexible than the previous law. So the mandate is for 50 years and for the borrowings up to 30 years. And it's capped at around 20 billion KD, which is about $60 billion. So that allowed some kind of flexibility. And now it is talking to the market. And hopefully before the end of this year, they will be doing an international bond issue. I think a month ago, they did a number of local bond issues in Kuwaiti dinar, extent of around maybe 700 million KD, to about 2 billion or so. So with the public debt law, at least it's giving them a tool that they can use to manage their fiscal policy. The other thing is that the Kuwait Petroleum Company, Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, the mother company, the parent company, is also looking to borrow from the market around $7 billion, mainly to cater for their infrastructure projects and expansions. And they're looking at basically leasing some of their pipelines that they have. So they do a sale leaseback kind of structure. Again, it's monetizing some of their idle assets that are there to create some liquidity. They can't rely on the government on funding their infrastructure. So reforms are necessary. Cutting back on the on the government expenditure is necessary. Stopping the waste is necessary, and basically focusing on investing in developmental projects rather than white elephant projects is more of what's the focus, next focus, basically. They're hoping that for the revival of what's called Silk City or the North City or Sabriya, which is an area north of Kuwait City on the other side of Kuwait Bay, closer to the Iraqi border, adjacent to Bobian Island. This is going to be a free zone, free zone, which is about 30 kilometers long, 15 kilometers wide. That will be more of a logistics hub that's serviced by Mubarak al-Kabir port, and there'll be elements for IT sort of development, some kind of a financial hub, as well as some residential pieces within that area. The original vision is that as a trade-free zone, the free trade zone, it will have its own legislation, a much more flexible sort of environment that can attract foreign investment into that area and overcoming the red tape. The original plan envisaged that this area can generate about $12 billion a year to the government sort of treasury. And they are hoping that they can do this by attracting probably some investments from China and other countries, primarily. So that would be, again, another challenge. Kuwait Airport, the new Kuwait Airport, is a project that many people are waiting to see sort of coming into operation. I think it's probably 70% or 80% complete. But again, it's a huge project, and it was supposed to have been completed 2 years ago, but there are still some variation orders that are taking place, which are delaying matters. So probably we might not see the new Kuwait Airport before 2 years from now. So we're in 2025. So hopefully by 2027, the new airport will open. It's going to be a grand airport, which will help and again, giving Kuwait some kind of a competitive advantage and attracting new airlines coming back to Kuwait, because a lot of foreign airlines, they stopped flying to Kuwait. So Kuwait is being serviced by Kuwait Airways and our regional airlines, Emirates, Qatar, and Gulf Air. And of course, yeah, to a certain extent, a Turkish airline. So in the past, Kuwait, people who want to travel to Kuwait, they had a lot of, so that's going to be a very important milestone. So yeah, we're hopeful. Everybody's hopeful that things will be much better in the future.
I just want to take step by step because you made a lot of good points there. The first one is the sovereign bond issuance, the international one. We talked a lot on the last podcast of why it took so long, and I mentioned to you when I went in 2017 when the international bond was issued, and you're correct, like everything you said. And it was interesting talking to the local Kuwaiti business families who complained to the IMF representative who was giving the presentation at this building that why do we need to issue so much debt when we're already a rich country and there's a lot of wastage and corruption and all these things. But fast forward to today, Issam, we're in a different situation fiscally, politically, everything. And obviously Kuwait's in a very different position than to when it issued that bond. I mean, if this bond issuance comes, how important is that to Kuwait's financial market in addition to like its debt financing?
Many Kuwaitis mix wealth with liquidity. The concept of wealth and the concept of liquidity, to many sort of Kuwaitis is unclear, not very clear. Being wealthy doesn't mean that you are cash liquid. And when you spend more than you earn, and when revenues are less than your expenditures, you will have a dent in your fiscal policy. So when you have a dent in your fiscal policy, you don't go and liquidate your assets. We already done that for about 6 years, trying to cover the deficit from our general reserves until it was almost completely depleted. Then they started looking at the Future Generations Fund, and basically the Parliament sort of put some kind of pressure on the government to use some of those funds. And, they did an asset swap with the Future Generations Fund to provide some liquidity. But the Future Generations Fund is not supposed to be touched now, okay? And that's when people say, well, we got a lot of wealth. Why do we need to borrow? Precisely because you need to borrow to manage your cash flow. To manage your cash flow, you need to bridge those gaps, and you need to do reforms. You need to increase, and you have to revisit your taxation system. You have to revisit your basically offer services to a general public, or rent sort of land or government properties to the general public. A lot of these items are being sort of underpriced. Even we're not talking about market, we're talking about way below market, and people who enjoy those sort of assets, they are making like 10 times, I'm not making exaggeration, making 10 times what it costs them, what they pay to the government. So that's why the repricing of those services is very, very, very important. So reforms are critical for Kuwait fiscal policy. So the public debt law comes as a solution to manage the cash flows and to avoid further liquidating the sovereign wealth fund. But at the same time, we have to really look carefully into how we can improve our revenues from other sources. Removing some of the to energy, to petrol, to social welfare, reducing the size of the government. Okay, right now 79, I think it's about over 80% of the Kuwaiti population work for the government. I mean, if you come to Kuwait and you have a chance to deal with government offices, you'll find a lot of hidden unemployment. A lot of people sitting around on their chairs, they're not doing much. And, that just tells you that work can go on with half of that sort of labor force that are basically working for the government. So the idea is to shift the employment from the government into the private sector. But to do that, you need to create the right environment for the private sector to flourish. You don't want the private sector to be competing with the government. So, for example, you have a national carrier, Kuwait Airways, which is being sort of subsidized by the government. And, it's a loss-making entity for many years. And you want to basically encourage new private sector airlines in Kuwait. It's unfair competition. Of course, we have Al Jazeera, who's basically a niche player. Al Jazeera Airlines is a niche player, and they're proving to be sort of a profitable sort of entity. But again, it's facing a big competition. You can see similar examples in other fields, okay? So government should stop competing with the private sector, create a business-friendly environment for local businesses to flourish, to focus on being a regulator, supervisor over the economy rather than a provider of services. It starts basically privatizing the electricity, starts privatizing some of the upstream oil-related businesses, to basically, looking carefully into our educational system. And there's a study that Kuwaiti students cost more to study with in public schools as compared to private schools. Private schools, on average, it costs about $12,000 students studying in private school. Very good environment. Or public schools students cost about $18,000 student per year. And when you look at the output, comparing the two, it's, and the test is basically the chances of getting sort of accepted to study abroad. And you see the outcome, that's a clear indication of whether this is money well spent or not. Our education system has suffered a lot after the 1991 and Gulf War. We used to have a much better educational system in the past. So again, reform to our education system, reform to our healthcare, reform into our housing projects. This just because it's all adds up to the burden over the government sort of budget. So now they're talking about having a different approach about housing projects in Kuwait involving the private sector. So the government will become the customer rather than the developer. So, they put the requirements and it will provide the land, and the real estate developers will basically develop and offer housing solutions at a much more affordable and much faster pace to those who are waiting. We have about 100,000 people registered for government housing, and their waiting time is about maybe 18 years. So hopefully, So hopefully, with these new schemes, they'll be able to reduce the number of people who are waiting for housing benefits, and basically cutting down on the time, the waiting time. So interesting times ahead.
A lot of challenges. The two things that came to my mind is when if you speak to political economists who specialize in the Gulf, like people like Stefan Hertog and all these guys, they mention the big one is obviously, and you've alluded to this a lot, the public sector. The size of the public sector eats up a lot of the budgets of the Kuwaiti government budget. Why is it so difficult to reform the public sector in Kuwait?
Okay. First it was the parliament. Now the parliament is outside, it's no longer a challenge. The other thing is that reforms means cutting back on benefits largely. And cutting back on benefits for people that have basically got used to it, expected, it became part of their income, direct income, would result in a whiplash, basically from the people. The government, they want to win the people. They don't want to lose the people. There are priorities of what comes first. People in Kuwait, they enjoy a very generous social security umbrella and free healthcare, free education. If you want to do a reform, then you will have to set prices for these services, even if it's nominal prices. So if Each student costs about $1,000 a year. If you come and ask people to pay $2,000 a year, people start screaming, okay? If they pay $2,000 a year, they will know that they will come to a realization that this is not a free commodity. They'll start to appreciate the service. Although they're not paying for the whole cost, okay? But it will add to their it will cut back on their disposable income. And that's when people become becomes a little bit agitated. And the government has to navigate these waters very carefully. So yes, reforms are necessary. It's just that they have to see which reforms comes first, and they have to show positive impact on the economy, on the people, for them to accept any further reforms. And if they are going to do any reforms, people expect the reforms to be implemented on the government structure first before it touches the people's pockets. So that's what they're trying to do, and that's why they're trying to do these government restructuring of ministries and what have you. And hopefully, it will come. If you ask me, are they doing the reforms fast enough? My answer is no. And my concern is that if it's at such a slow pace, it might be a little too late when things you face even bigger challenges.
I just returned from Saudi Arabia, which I was just telling you offline. It was the first time in 7 years I've visited there. And the pace of change is just unbelievable to see how everything has changed in Saudi Arabia, from society to the economics. Other countries are also accelerating their own plans. UAE, each Emirate is doing their own thing. You've got Bahrain, Qatar. Oman are doing a lot. Oman have been very fiscally conservative since the new sultan's come in 2020. It seems like Kuwait is the odd one out in that it's taking a very long time to do anything. How would you compare Kuwait's experience to, say, its Gulf neighbors?
Okay, I go back to the parliament. Okay, it's not to put the blame on the parliament. When you have basically Gulf monarchies that are being ruled by basically a single, it's easier to implement change, development, than a system that's much more plural, where it has to take things within consensus. So we're used to basically trying to hold the stick from the middle rather than basically take sharp decisions or drastic measures in tackling those issues. And the 4-year grace period, which the Emir has announced for the parliament to be on hold, time is ticking. So we're already 1 year behind. So we have 3 more years to go. And the reforms pace will have to be accelerated much more. And therefore, to compare Kuwait with the rest of neighboring countries, we have a different, I don't like the word different. I should say our approach is much more towards consensus rather than a single decision. And we want to learn how to be much more, to give people the ability to make decisions and not being blamed for it, and be accountable for their decisions. I think what Kuwait has been learned over the years. In the past, people shunned away from taking decisions because they don't want to be blamed for it. I mean, if I take an initiative and something goes wrong, okay, my name, my reputation is at stake. For what? It's a thankless task. However, this has to change, okay, and that's part of the reform. And to accelerate reform is to basically give people the backing support to make decisions and not to be blamed for it. Because a lot of people, they suffered being referred to the general prosecution for any small because they say, well, these are public funds issues. Whenever you mention anything that's to do with public funds, people really get scared, because if you get an accusation that you have basically mismanaged public funds, intentionally or unintentionally, you can face serious consequences. And that's why people are a little bit afraid of. So we need to create an environment of trust and accountability to be able to accelerate the reforms in Kuwait.
Issam, at the top of the show, you mentioned that Kuwait is opening up and that, tourism, sectors like tourism are on the agenda for the government in terms of attracting FDI. But if I'm being very honest with you, Sam, like from what you're saying and from what I've read and from speaking to Kuwaitis and people who are in Kuwait, there's still a lot of challenges in terms of investment and business. When you compare, I don't like making comparisons, like you just said. It's not fair, really fair to make a comparison. But if you compare FDI levels in the UAE, for example, or even in a smaller country like Bahrain, which is smaller than Kuwait, both in terms of land and population, they get more GDP per capita. GDP went with Kuwait. I mean, what do you think the issue is in terms of, like, why would a company want to set up in Kuwait unless there was a specific reason?
We're not hungry enough. Okay. Again, you talk about wealth. People don't believe in that Kuwait needs to borrow, because they say we have plenty of wealth. So if you have this kind of mindset, what pushes you to go out and try to basically create an environment that's sort of appealing for FDIs to come and set up in Kuwait? If you don't have that kind of mindset and you are hungry to basically make reforms and attract FDIs into your country, then you'll see, a much different picture. Let me give you an example. Kadiba, which is an institution that's been set up to attract foreign direct investment into Kuwait, managed to get around $600 million, according to the last sort of statistic I saw, foreign investment to Kuwait. Bahrain, which is 3 times smaller economy than Kuwait, attracted about $2.5 billion. Oman, which is again probably half the size of economy of Kuwait, attracted around $5 billion. Okay, so this gives you an idea about the scope and the scale that Kuwait has, okay, in terms of potential to attract foreign direct investments into Kuwait. So we need to, change the mindset, be hungry enough, make the necessary changes, bring the sort of suitable lifestyle for foreign investors to come and set up in Kuwait. And then you will have a totally different story. Kuwait enjoys a very sort of special sort of geographic position, okay, at the tip of the Gulf, close to 2 large population masses, Iran and Iraq, not to mention Saudi Arabia. Okay, the business potential with these neighbors is huge. But again, there's challenges, in developing sort of the business. But nothing comes, if it was easy, we wouldn't be talking right now. Okay, so you need to tackle these issues, and Kuwait has always been a trading nation from hundreds of years. Okay, we used to be the trading boats of Kuwaitis used to take the dates from Basra in Iraq, okay, and go to East Africa, okay, and trade that with the wood from Africa, and they take it to India. And when they go to India, they buy all of their merchandise that they need and bring it back to the Gulf. So that's what, and merchant Kuwaiti families, they used to have offices in Aden and Zanzibar and in Mumbai, and they to look after their business. So that's the kind of sort of trading nation that we are. We've been very much an open society to trade. So trade is in our DNA. So the idea is to go back to our DNA and try to basically take advantage of this legacy within the modern sort of setup, of course.
I just want to shift the conversation a little bit, Issam. If we look at, you've talked at the beginning as well, you talked about the regional geopolitical situation, but it seems to me Kuwait is a bit absent in the President Trump's, whenever he talks about the Gulf, he always mentions Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, but when it comes to Kuwait, he doesn't really make much noise. How would you characterize the relationship between Kuwait and the Trump-led government in America?
That's what they call it, hidden blessings that we're not exactly on his mind. However, Kuwait continues to enjoy special relationships with the U.S. as the U.S. administration, the current U.S. administration, has basically tried to flex its muscles over Kuwait, with the announcement of the Secretary of Trade, when he basically in an interview where he specifically mentioned Kuwait, that basically the U.S. government is at disadvantage in their relationships with trade relationships with Kuwait. And that created a lot of sort of negative stuff because whatever he mentioned was factually incorrect. We have always been playing taking low profile since the Gulf War. It's probably best to keep a low profile from our perspective, given the volatility that's taking place in the region. So we stand together with our neighboring countries, Saudi Arabia, namely Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, and Oman. We enjoy very good close relationships with of course, Saudi Arabia. So we go with the GCC consensus rather than having sort of a separate voice by ourselves. And that's why when it comes to regional sort of importance, we're less important, fortunately, in the Gulf than the rest of Gulf states, because otherwise we will have to pay the price of that high profile in terms of commitment, financial and other, to the sort of...
This strike that Israel did on Qatar, reportedly targeting Hamas officials in Doha, how did Kuwait view this incursion into Qatari sovereignty?
And in Kuwait, sort of was outraged, and we were shocked by the news. One, it was totally unexpected, given the fact, given Qatar's role in trying to be a mediator and hosting the sort of for ceasefire. Two, for something to happen in the Gulf, direct attack, it was shocking. And the third thing is that, the fact that Qatar has been sort of, yes, it's in the forefront of, forefront of the GCC, trying to have a voice by itself. However, it's always been a voice for peace rather than, a voice that tries to antagonize its neighbors, especially in the last 5 years. So that's why we stood firmly with Qatar. The Qatari people, the attack on Qatar, people felt it's as if it's been an attack on Kuwait itself. That's how people sort of felt.
Yeah, this is the feeling I got when I was in Saudi Arabia as well, just talking to a few people. And then also a lot of people in Saudi Arabia were mentioning to me the 12-day war or 12-day skirmishes between Iran and Israel really, really amplified to them. They might get caught in the crosshairs. Did Kuwait feel the same when that happened?
Well, we had the Iranian missiles flying over Kuwait and people taking pictures of those missiles. Of course, very tough times. People were very concerned that, that conflict can get out of hand. Especially we're talking about nuclear facilities. So any facilities that start impacting harm to Iran and its people, all the rest of the Gulf. And that's why people were very concerned. Luckily, that conflict did not last for long. People in this part of the world, they want stability, they want peace. They're not active. Because this is a very prosperous part of the world, and its prosperity is the reason stability of its government and states. And any conflict that takes place around this area basically causes concern to the people and to its residents as well. And that's why stability is, and that's why the GCC countries, they always try to stand together as one in front of any possible conflict that's taking place, because they're small states, with the exception of Saudi Arabia. And so they have to stand together as one, and in order to ensure the growth, prosperity to this region.
Yeah, and I just recasts my mind back to an interview that the Qatari Prime Minister did with Tucker Carlson, and he mentioned that if America or Israel did attack Iran, it would also impact Qatar in terms of like its water and other facilities, national facilities within the country, because I think they do share a lot of facilities with Iran, like the gas field and stuff. But Issam, I just want to, as we bring the podcast to a close shortly, there's one other thing that really came to my mind when we were talking about Kuwait, is climate. It is often cited in a lot of... I know yesterday Donald Trump made this big speech at the UN talking about climate change as a hoax and it's a green scam and everything. But Kuwait, in a lot of studies by Harvard University and other reputable institutions, is always cited as a place of climate concern. Myself, I've experienced Kuwait's heat in the summer. I had the pleasure of coming in July 2017, and it was pretty intense, the heat. How would you characterize Kuwait's drive to or commitment to climate at the moment?
Well, you were very brave to come, venture to come to Kuwait during that time. So I commend you for that.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Kuwait is committed towards sort of initiatives to fight off climate change, because we also been experiencing increase in the temperatures. In the summer it was around so lower 40s, and now years later it's normal that's upper 40s or up to 50. It's become not uncommon, and so that has impact on the consumption of energy, the efficiency of the air conditioning systems in Kuwait, the welfare of those who are living, and of course the everything else, agriculture and what have you. So the government has basically signed on the United Nations Accord to fight. They're committing to zero. Are they taking measures seriously? Well, I mean, they have to introduce a matrix and the gauges so that people can measure for them, follow what if they're seeing the impact of that. So that's another thing that Kuwait needs to work very hard on, and basically production of data about the economy and other sectors in the something that we're lacking, and that's something one of the priorities to have to be able to navigate this big ship with dashboard.
I mean, in Kuwait, do people really talk about climate, or is it a big public discussion in Kuwait?
Of course, climate is how you start your discussion with your parents in the morning or with your friends. How's the temperature? Is it too hot to go out or not? Or if it's dusty or not, or it's humid or not. Of course, people really care about, genuinely care about.
But with regard to policy.
Yeah. Of course, again, policy goes back to my point. To have a policy and you have to measure against that policy, and that's what we're lacking right now. So we need to have those metrics and data being produced.
Tell us any projects you may be working on, any upcoming projects you may be working on.
Upcoming projects I'm working on. Okay, and so it's more about myself.
About you, yeah. Everyone wants to know what Issam is doing.
So we start now trading into some sort of confidential areas that I'm just joking about. My days are busy with, of course, some of the directorships that I have in Saudi Arabia, more on my personal business side. Doing some consultancy and setting up some investment company in Bahrain that's focusing on logistics, aviation, with a group of investors from the Gulf. And this company is called Thabat Investment. It's first year of operation, and we're very much encouraged with the results so far. Business. They're trying to be a niche player because there are a lot of investment companies in Bahrain and the region. Logistics and aviation is not an area that's widely sort of addressed, and that's what we're trying to do. So that's business sort of focus. Other than that, I'm enjoying my also working close to academia. So I'm now a visiting fellow with Durham Business School. Okay, and, so hopefully, probably in the next few months, I'll be doing some lectures there, and probably start some joint research on that are relating to the GCC, because GCC for me is my backyard, my area of interest. And there's a lot to study. So so I do have my day filled with some exciting with.
I always see you on Al Arabiya or one of these like Arabic news channels talking about the GCC fixed income markets, and it's always a pleasure to see you on the TV. And Issam, before we sign off, what's the best way for people to reach you? Are you still active on social media, or have you cut that down?
Well, yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on X. I'm on LinkedIn. I enjoy sharing my knowledge with people and expertise, and especially when it comes to the GCC. But one of the things I don't like is that when people try to approach me, trying to basically trying to sell things to the selling side. I'm more on the business development side. And, so anybody who wants to basically have an idea, wants to share that idea, brainstorm it, I'm happy to do that.
I'll link your handles in the show notes, but and also any other thing you want me to link in. But Issam Altawari, this has been a really great conversation, really great catch up, and I'm glad we're doing this on video now. This will go on YouTube as well. But Issam, really great to see you again, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I enjoy my discussions with you. You always basically inspire me to think about new areas, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you very much for having me.
All the best. Thank you.